Hey guys, welcome back to another segment of Beardman Reviews. Now, if you haven't watched one of my Beardman reviews, then you might notice sometimes I have a bit of a stutter. It's not something I can really control. It just pops up. Sometimes it's not even there, like right now, and other times it shows up. So if I suddenly can't English very well, then that is why. And today I have a very special one for you. We have a review by the one, the only, the heaviest band in the universe, Mortician. Now, these guys are one of my favorite bands of all time. I get the common complaints of A, they use too many samples. B, all of their songs sound exactly the same. And yes, yes, extremely true. But that's what I love about them. I love the fact that they are the very definition of a one trick pony. A lot of their songs open up with a very eerie horror movie sample of somebody. 9 times out of 10, it's somebody getting savagely murdered from a classic horror movie. Then it opens up with a really chunky riff, and then they kick in to the blast beats. And as a drummer, I love drumming along to these songs. I know that it's a drum machine, okay, but the guitarist Roger is actually a drummer himself as well, and on their album Final Bloodbath Sessions, he recorded the drums live. I believe it was like him too that recorded the drums live. So that's extremely impressive. And they tour with the drummer. I forgot his name at the moment, but he does very well, extremely well. So the drum machine on their albums do not bother me because I know that they have actual people that can blast beat this fast, and the albums are just so brutal. They truly live up to their name of the heaviest band in the universe. And this album, I'll show you, Chainsaw Dismemberment, is the album that I will be talking about right now. This is probably either this album or Reinventing Dead Flesh, Reanimating Dead Flesh, sorry, are tied for my favorite album. I love Hacked Up, but in my personal opinion, these two albums are just a little bit stronger. But they truly have no quote unquote bad albums because all of their albums pretty much are the same. But what makes this album so special, though, is that this album is so groove laden. It's not just it's not just that. It's songs like the classic "Rabid" and "Drowned in Your Blood" and "Island of the Dead." These songs just have so much chunky grooves to them, and they are just so hard not to jam along to. That's why I love this album. In my opinion, this is probably their grooviest album. It's almost like they wanted to focus on the grooves more than just the quick blast beats. A lot of these songs I can see people moshing to constantly. This album also has, in my opinion, some of the better usage of samples that they've done, no sample feels like it goes on for too long. Even the sample for Stab, which I believe is the longest sample on this album. Correct me in the comments if I'm wrong, but I believe that Stab is the longest sample on this album. But even that is just that is such a classic movie, also, and that's such a classic moment, right? Like my dad, when we were talking about classic horror movie moments years ago. He said that when he was a kid and he watched that movie for the first time, when the cop says the calls are coming from inside the house, like he said that he could physically feel just like a terror within him watching this for the first time. So that is such a classic moment. So I believe the sample is literally like half as long as the song is. But I don't care because that is such a classic moment, and it ends on such a great cliffhanger, and then the song it kicks in, and it's just so brutal. So this album's usage of samples are perfect in my opinion. There are again no samples feel like okay, okay, come on. On the like no samples on this album feel like that. If you're not a fan of the samples, then you won't like this album. Sorry, because every Mortician album has samples except for the previously mentioned album Final Bloodbath Sessions. If you're not a fan of the samples, check out that album. It's just a straightforward Mortician album. Then you'll see why the samples are great. Because the samples is what sets this band apart. I know I'm speaking about the samples more than the actual music right now, but that is because there's really not a whole lot to say about the actual music itself. Will Raymer's vocals are so guttural. They're so brutal. They're just they're just so brutal that he could literally be saying anything, and I would have no idea what he is saying, and even following along with the lyrics is close to impossible because of how his tone is, with how his vocals aren't super prevalent in the mix. They're mostly just there. They're mostly just there to give that extra layer of brutality. And truth be told, I don't mind it. I don't mind how his vocals really aren't super loud, because do you really want vocals like this to be just as loud as the guitar? No. Because his vocals, he's not like Will Ramos or I'm trying to think of another, or Glenn Bitten or anything. Okay, he's no David Vincent even, but he is still a classic vocalist and a great bassist. And his vocals are perfect for Mortician. If you had a more dynamic vocalist, or even a vocalist that does a more like a mid-low, like say a David Vincent back in his heyday, if you put David Vincent on a Mortician album, it would not work. It would not work because Will's just absolute brutal gutturals add that perfect layer of just sheer heaviness. It's really like another instrument. I hate it when, well, I shouldn't say that. I don't care for when people describe extreme metal vocals as another instrument, because I personally don't see it that way. Um, but in this case, it really is like another instrument in the mix. I There's really no negatives about this album other than Master, another classic death metal band, uh, says it best. When you listen to a Master album, you get Master. That's like a paraphrased, but that's essentially what they say. And it's the same thing with with Mortician. When you listen to a Mortician album, you're going to get a Mortician album. They are not trying to sound like anyone else but themselves. They're not trying to. They're they're basically saying, "Hey, this is us, and if you don't like us, then you can walk along." And I thoroughly respect that because they are very unashamed of their sound, and they shouldn't be because they are a classic band. The the guitars on this album. I know that this album was recorded with a third member, uh, Desmond Tolburst, yeah, and I honestly I don't know what his contribution was, but it might not be a coincidence that this is their most groove laden album, and I think this is their only album with him. I could be wrong about that, but I believe this is their only album with him on there, and this is their grooviest album. I don't think that's a coincidence personally. So that could be his contribution. But regardless, the guitars on this album with Roger and him and Will on the bass are what drive this album. They are what sets this album apart from any other Mortician album. If you if you haven't checked out Mortician already, then I would recommend checking out this album. Okay, so if you're not a fan of death metal, if you're not a really big fan of death metal, then you won't like Mortician at all. But if you are like me, a very massive big sorry, if you are a very massive rather fan of death metal, then check these guys out if you haven't already, because these guys what are what death grind is all about. You have the fast grindcore style, and you have the death metal grooves. These guys are just really awesome. If you don't like it, I understand, but I love this album personally, and I have been listening to this album nonstop for 3 days now. Um, so if I were to rate this album, I would easily rate this a 9 out of 10. Why wouldn't I rate it a 10 out of 10? Well, because it doesn't reinvent the wheel. In order for an album to be like a perfect a 10 out of 10, it's got to be something that is unlike anything I have ever heard ever. For me personally, or it needs to just be just a classic, just absolute perfect album. And for me personally, this doesn't quite reach that. but it's an album that I love with all of my heart and soul. So yeah. So Mortician, Chainsaw, Dismemberment, 9 out of 10. Absolute amazing album. Please check it out. If you are a death metal head like me. And this has been another segment of Beardman Reviews. Stick around for another drum video that I will be dropping soon. All right, guys. Thank you. Bye.